Hello, and welcome to this latest installment of the Ropes webinar series, Israel, Hamas, and the Future of Gaza. My name is Ben Birnbaum, and I'm the founder of Ropes. And for those of you who are learning about us for the first time, Ropes is a nonprofit organization that works to expand the coalition for a conflict-ending Middle East peace deal by connecting forward-thinking Israeli and Palestinian emerging leaders with like-minded peers across the Middle East and North Africa. And I think if there was ever a time that we realized that we do need a new generation of Middle East leaders, it's now. For us at Ropes, for our Israeli and Palestinian alumni, and I'm sure for so many of you, the last few weeks have been some of the toughest of our lifetimes. I can tell you, we at Ropes, we have alumni in Israel who were in the border communities on October 7th. We have Palestinian alumni from Gaza whose families are now looking to escape from the Israeli military response. And we obviously have too many people who have lost those who are dear to them. And I know so many of us have questions about what is looking like it's going to be a long war, and we want to know. And so we have assembled an amazing panel for you of experts to answer your questions. And we are going to get to those questions. So in just a moment, I'm going to introduce the panelists and ask some opening questions. And then when we open up to you, I'm asking you to just please put your questions in the Q&A box and list your name and your location. And we will get to as many of those as we can. So without further ado, let me introduce our incredible panel. Ksenia Svetlova, Ropes' executive director, served as a Knesset member from 2015 to 2019 for former Israeli foreign minister Tzipi Livni's Hatnuah faction, an expert on the Middle East and Russia. She was a longtime Arab affairs reporter for Israel's Channel 9. She has also been a director of the Israel Middle East program at the Mitvim Institute and a fellow at both the Atlantic Council and Reichman University's Institute for Policy and Strategy. Samer Sinjalawi is head of diplomatic and international relations for the Fatah's shadow leadership. Samer is chairman and major shareholder of Group Al Fasit, a regional energy investment group with branches in Jerusalem, Amman, Abu Dhabi, and Madrid. Sinjalawi is founding chairman of the Jerusalem Development Fund, a public corporation facilitating the development of Jerusalem through the construction of housing projects, hotels, commercial centers, and educational institutions. Samer was head of the international and Israeli relations on the Fatah Supreme Committee. And last but certainly not least, Salman Sheikh is the founder and CEO of the Sheikh Group, a Middle East Track 2 outfit. Before establishing the Sheikh Group, he was the director of the Brookings Institution's Doha Center and also served in several high-ranking positions at the United Nations dealing with the Middle East, including as special assistant to the Middle East and Asia, and in the office of the Undersecretary of General for Political Affairs, political advisor to the Secretary General's personal representative to Lebanon during the 2006 war, and many others. So without further ado, let me start with you, Ksenia, because I was just in Israel a few weeks ago, and man, things have really changed. So I know a lot of people are tuning into the news, but can you paint us just a picture for us, not just visually, but emotionally? What are people going through, and where do they see the path from here in what looks like it could be a few months at a minimum war?
Hello, Ben, and shalom and salam to everyone. Shalom and salam to everyone. This has been the hardest time, as you said, for all of us here. And if I want to describe with one sentence the feeling that we have today, it's that we cannot breathe. We cannot breathe. We are in shock. We are traumatized. We are bleeding. Our souls bleed. There is, it's hardly a family in Israel that was affected by what happened in this Black Saturday on the 7th of October. And you're opening a radio, and there you have chilling stories of survivors or of the heroes who fought but did not survive. You're going with your kids to a playground, and there all of the mothers and the fathers, they look how the children play, and you see how they are worried. They are looking around. They understand that basically now you anticipate that anything can happen. That's the feeling, this is the complete loss of any sense of security. You are talking with your children, and then they nonchalantly ask you during the random conversation over Shabbat dinner table about some horrific details from what happened to the people, to the children who were there, who were murdered by the terrorists of Hamas. What about those who were kidnapped, they ask, and you don't have anything to tell them about it. I think that for people who were engaging in close dialogue and also peacemaking for a while, people like me, people like you, Ben, like our friends here, that know both sides, it's even harder, it's more difficult than for everybody else. Because then you also have concern for your friend in Gaza, who called me on the 7th of October, when the worst that we could imagine happened, and he knew that also the worst that he could imagine will happen to him and his people in Gaza. And now I cannot reach him anymore for an hour, for a few days. And you look at this horrible images, you look at the footage that is coming out, from Israel, it's ongoing, it's not stopping. You look at the pictures from Gaza of the children there, and you think about the traumatized generation, about this effect that you cannot even imagine the future. You cannot even start talking about the future today. This is the most, I think, difficult part of all of it. And this is why is it so important that today, despite the pain, and it's an immense pain, it just takes all of you being, we will continue talking, because it's not Jews against the Arabs, it's not Palestinians against the Israelis, or vice versa. It's moderates with moderates against extremists who from both sides. And this is what we believe in Ropes. I was never more confident about the importance of our task than today. But we need a moment to breathe, to start breathing again, to start talking about the future and our perspectives for building a better one with our allies and friends.
Thank you so much, Ksenia. That was very well said. And now I want to bring in Samer. Samer, are you with us? And Samer, you forcefully condemned the attack, Hamas's attack on October 7th. And you're obviously never been a fan of Hamas and frankly not a fan of the current Palestinian Authority. And you've also expressed major reservations about what Israel is currently doing in Gaza. So I'm wondering if you can also just paint us a picture of what life looks like for just normal Palestinians, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. And you're obviously based in Jerusalem, and that has, in previous rounds of conflict, been a powder keg. So what are your greatest fears in the coming weeks, and what should people be paying attention to?
Well, I think in this conflict, we need to try, before being Israelis or Palestinians, Arabs or Europeans, Muslims or Christians or Jews, we need to be humans. And I think it's very necessary now that we collectively draw the moral red line in this conflict. It's clear for everybody that this conflict will never be peaceful. It will continue to be violent from both sides. But at least we should draw some moral red lines. And one of the most important moral red lines is that nobody should accept killing kids. And those who have killed the Israeli kids on the 7th of October are criminals, and they should go to justice. The massacres that happened there is condemned by everybody. But also, there has been a daily massacre in Gaza since the 7th of October until now. And those who are killing the kids in Gaza are also war criminals and should be brought to justice. And it's not for me or for any of the panelists to decide who was the war criminal and which act of war crime have been committed any moment at any side of the border. It is the ICC job. It's time for the ICC to come to the stage, investigate everything that has happened 7th of October and investigate everything that has happened since 7th October and continues until now on both sides of the fence. This is a moral obligation on humanity, because it's not enough to condemn or to justify. What will this help? It will not help all these lives that has been lost on both sides. As a Palestinian, I really feel that there is a tragedy that is happening every day. And there is no any political or military gain out of this strategy that is continuing. We should all work hard to start calling for the immediate stop of war. And then we can fix everything that has happened during the war and before. I am sure that the Israelis, the Palestinians, and the whole world that we knew before 7th of October is not the same Israelis or Palestinians or the whole world that we face now after the 7th of October. There is a huge impact that has touched everybody. The Israelis at one side, they have a cocktail of feelings. They have the fear. They have the feeling of revenge, of insecurity, of blaming the government, of anger towards Palestinians, and it is understood. And the Palestinians at the other side, they feel more and more that the injustice is continuing to fall on their shoulders. I'm talking on behalf of the children on Gaza, on the civilians. I'm not here talking on behalf of any organization. So everybody here is a little bit confused what kind of stand he should show to the world. I think we should be human before being Israelis and Palestinians and try to express our humanity towards those innocents who fell on the 7th of October and in the area surrounding Gaza, and to all those human beings, innocent civilians who are falling daily inside Gaza. From my experience, I'm not sure that the reaction towards what was happened by choosing power and military options can lead us anywhere. We have been trying these kind of exercises for so long, and Israel have tried these exercises so long. It did not lead us anywhere. The target for the war in Lebanon was to eliminate PLO. And this war costed a lot of innocent lives. And then PLO was not eliminated. Even without eliminating PLO, we have now a more violent resistance that came out of Gaza, and we can see the results now. And I am afraid that resorting to violence and military option will also not help us to fix the problems. This is the time that we should work, Israelis and Palestinians and the whole international community, hand in hand, to start opening path for political development. And the more we delay the issue, the more the problem becomes more complicated. The number of population of the Palestinians in Gaza 15 years ago was 1.5 million people. Today they are 2.3 million people. Even if this war kills 100,000 Palestinians, because if this war will continue for another 3 months at the average of 500 Palestinians killed every day, we might reach to 100,000 Palestinian victims killed in this war. Even though the number of Palestinians in Gaza in 10 years will be 3 million, in 25 years will be 5 million. And each time the international community and Israel delays facing the political option, the problem will be more complicated and more complicated on two levels. The number of
Samar, I'm sorry.
Palestinians.
I think we need to just finish your thought, please. Yes, sir.
On two levels, it will be more complicated. The number of Palestinians is always getting larger and larger. And then each generation of Palestinians is becoming more complicated and more violent. If you see the generation of the PLO, then the generation of the Intifada, and then the generation of the 7th of October, and you can imagine what will happen in 5 years if the problem continues. So the more we delay it, the more we think that this conflict is manageable, that we want to avoid a solution, the more we are sinking down into a way that it will be more complex, more complicated. So I'll stop here and then we can catch up on others.
Thank you so much, Samer. And now I want to go to Salman. And Salman, we've now had, I lose track at this point, 6 or 7 of these wars since the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, beginning in 2009, up until the present day. And with each of them, we've sort of learned to expect a certain pattern of international response. Obviously, the US traditionally being very supportive of Israel, the Arab world, even those countries that maybe might support action against Hamas, condemning Israel. And the wild card has always been Europe. And one thing I found very interesting is that the music we've been hearing from Brussels and European capitals has been a little different since October the 7th. There was a resolution that passed the European Parliament, I believe it was 500 to 21, stating that Hamas must be eliminated and, in essence, subscribing to the Israeli war goal. I'm wondering, what do you think is behind that? Do you see this support for Israel in Europe lasting? And could you speak a little bit about some of the major powers and what's going into their thinking on the current crisis, specifically the UK, France, Germany, and any others that you think are relevant?
Thanks, Ben. It's very good to be online with you and Ropes and the Ropes community, as well as, of course, my friend Kesnia and Samir. Let me just start by saying, you mentioned, I think it's 6 or 7 conflicts we've been through. I lived in Gaza at the start of the second Intifada in 2000. It's absolutely horrific what has gone on in Israel on October the 7th, the acts of terror which was committed, and then what we're now seeing in Gaza today. I heard today, speaking to someone in Israel, that there are 31 children and babies which are being held hostage today. More than 21, I think, are now separate children, are orphans, and many more have lost kids. And of course, Save the Children yesterday told us that we've lost more children in Gaza in conflict than we've lost in conflicts in the last 4 years or so. As someone who used to watch Palestinian children still going to school at the start of the second Intifada at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning so that they could have 2 shifts at school, this is just such a terrible state of affairs to be in. Both our other contributors have obviously spoken much more powerfully and authoritatively on this conflict. So I'll move on to that and answer your particular question. On Europe, I'm afraid Europe is divided. You saw that in the UN General Assembly vote. You've seen that in UN Security Council votes, as well as Brussels. Yes, I would say that most European countries, probably with the notable exception of Spain, would say it's the right of Israel for self-defense. You've heard that very, very clearly from London, both from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. But, and there is a but, the longer this goes on, you can see the pressure mounting on European leaders. Certainly Western Europe, these are multicultural societies. They are the sum of the people that make them. And for example, in the UK, you have large numbers of communities that come from either the Arab or the Muslim world who have settled here. I'm one of those. I'm speaking to you from London today. You see that reflected in terms of the protests that have come out. London, probably 300 to 500,000 people came out just a couple of days ago. I suspect that these protests will continue to grow around European capitals. In London, I wouldn't be surprised if we reach 1 million quite quickly, similar to what we saw during the Iraq war as such. And of course, it's dividing societies in a way which is raising now even the terror threat level within it. Today, there's more and more discussion about, both in Europe, mainland, as well as in the UK, about the increasing threat of militant terrorist acts. And of course, this is making communities very, very uncertain and fearful. We know that from the Jewish communities in the UK, in France, in other parts, as well as leaving governments grappling with what is free speech, what is acceptable, what is not, in what are open democracies. One thing that will unite Europe, I believe, is the call for a humanitarian pause now. This may be controversial to some, particularly in Israel, who feel that how else can you degrade or eliminate Hamas at what are still considered to be early stages of military operation. But in Europe, and you asked me for the view in Europe, I think you would see increasingly a unity around a humanitarian pause, if not a humanitarian ceasefire. And here, let me focus on the hostages inside Gaza, as well as the humanitarian support that's being provided into Gaza. It's quite clear that without a pause, we're not going to see considerable movement on the hostage issue, and we're not going to be able to get the kind of supplies spread around to the populations in Gaza. So I think within the context of Europe, whether it's Germany, whether it's France, whether it's the UK, the so-called P3, but other countries too, you will continue to see a level of division, of societal angst, and division and breakdown, potentially, maybe even violence, unless you start to see a more de-escalatory trend that emerges from Gaza itself. And that, of course, means the rockets which Kesnia and Samir could be subjected to at any minute stopping, and for us to try to find other ways in which to achieve our objectives.
Thank you so much, Salman. Ksenia, I want to go back to you, and I want to talk a little bit about the political impact, such as we can gather, of October 7th and the war. Can Netanyahu recover from this politically? And if not, what is the mechanism by which he would be replaced? Should we expect early elections? I know it's a little too early to tell, that we're all speculating. We've had very little data so far, but there have been a few polls showing what the impact is. I'm wondering if you could discuss that. And also the judicial overhaul, which divided the country in the run-up to October 7th. Is it fair to say that that is now dead or just frozen, that could come back? Please just give us a political overview as you see it.
As an answer to your first question, I think that it's safe to say that Mr. Netanyahu does not have any political future whatsoever. Of course, the example of the Yom Kippur War comes to mind, and then the prime minister that was in charge at that time had some decency, and she resigned. However, as we are looking at Netanyahu's behavior so far, I think it's an unlikely scenario in this case. So there are two assumptions already, yes, that I voiced out, that his future, he has no future, he's done because of the anger, because of this disappointment, and because we actually are just starting this war. This is the tragedy about it. The tragic thing about this, that the worst, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little bit, dramatic to some people, especially those outside of Israel and Palestine, but it feels that the worst is yet to come. And we are not talking only about the possibility of opening the Northern Front. Of course, we are talking about the, destabilization in the West Bank, which was destabilized before, and somebody wrote here about blood that was spilling there. Yes, absolutely. And we wrote about it, and we warned about it, and we spoke about it every single day. And yet, what might happen there now? Well, everybody understands what kind of doomsday scenario are taking place right now. So given that, now Israel counts over 1,400 dead and counting, and 230 people being taken hostages right now in the Hamas, but this is not the end of the story, because every day, you will have with this war more people, especially young people, soldiers, that will be added to this awful blacklist of people who are no longer with us. So the pressure will mount, and the tensions will grow, especially within the emergency government of Netanyahu and Gantz. I would say that although we are certain that Netanyahu is a dead man walking, basically, politically wise, but we do not know how long it will take until he will be removed from power, when one way or the other, whether it's premature elections or elections that come on time. And during these elections, he will lose the power. It's really difficult right now to think about some other scenario, because there is no mechanism. There is no other mechanism of in the situation in which he still has his 64 fingers in the Knesset. The voices that are coming from the Likud party, the ruling party, and who condemn his management of the country for this very long period, since 2009 in row. There are few until now that were speaking out, but they are not the most well-known leaders of the Likud. They are not people from the first 10 MKs of the Likud. And it seems that some people there still believe that they can somehow still, during the dirty political games that they are playing already now in the middle of this horrific crisis, when we are burying our dead, they still can manage this. And therefore, this is the most dangerous, I think, reality for our country. When Israel is going to war, and it is what it is, to have this deep mistrust between political leadership and the people, political leadership and the army, the mistrust between the people and the army, because army had failed us. Army had failed, the innocent human beings who were slaughtered, who were kidnapped, who were molested, who were raped in their homes while they're sleeping. So this tension that is growing, it's not only addressed, of course, at Netanyahu, but unlike Netanyahu, the heads of the security agencies had taken already, they assumed the responsibility, they claimed the responsibility. He did no such thing. And I think that just adds to the antagonism towards him. And eventually, somebody have to give it up, and it will not be the Israeli people.
Thank you, Ksenia. Samer, I want to go back to you and ask you about the political impact of the situation, specifically on Gaza, because the Israeli government has made it very clear that they're not going to stop until they topple the Hamas regime. They're making the connection to ISIS in Iraq, and I know you are obviously against the current operation, but if Israel is successful in toppling Hamas, what can replace it? What are the different scenarios? And specifically, if you could comment also on the role of the regional states. Is there a role for Arab countries? There's been talk maybe of a consortium that would involve the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. I'm wondering if you could take us through some of the different possible constellations. I know Mohammed Dahlan well. Is there a potential role for him as well, given his Gaza ties?
Ben, I passed a little bit on the Q&A, and there was a lot of questions about whether the current Israeli war is justified to have such large number of collective damage, what can be put into between brackets as collective damage. And there is always that theory that Israel likes to run and says, well, these kids, now we reach to around 4,000 kids that were killed during this war. These kids were used by Hamas as human shields. And it is Hamas that holds the criminal responsibility on their killing. I think nobody that has a minimal knowledge of the international law and a minimal sense of military operations can accept this excuse. Let me ask the Israeli public, where does the Ministry of Defense, where is it located? The Israeli Ministry of Defense is located in the most populated area in Tel Aviv. It is next to a mall, commercial mall, one of the biggest in Israel. It is surrounded by high-rise buildings, all apartments, very busy during the day. Does this mean that Israel, the Israeli army, is using the Israeli civilians as human shields from the Hamas rockets? Of course, no. The total area of Gaza is 360 square kilometers. There is no land in Gaza to be used as agriculture. Now, again, I don't want to be defending Hamas. I just want to raise the awareness that there is no excuse accepted to cause these huge number of civilian innocent casualties under the title of a war against Hamas. This is a war against children in Gaza. It is targeting civilians. Everybody knows that all the Hamas militias are under the ground. The 25,000 soldiers of Hamas, their leadership, their generals, their chief of staff, all of them are under the ground. And Israel currently now is hitting everything above the ground. We see the bombarding, destroying buildings, housings. I'll give you one example. One of Hamas leaders is Ghazi Hamad. He is in Beirut giving press release, including today he was interviewed live by Al Jazeera. Since 3 months, everybody knows that Ghazi Hamad is in Beirut. And still, the Air Force of Israel targeted his home and killed 19 of his families while he's not in Gaza at all.
So I'm
How
sorry.
is this justifies?
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is a very sensitive issue because by the end of the day, there are Palestinian population there. And he is receiving these hits. And these hits are continuing. If there were 3,000 Hamas operatives who invaded the borders and have done the massacres on the 7th of October, half of them were killed. Half of them came back. 1,500 people came back. How can you kill 10,000 people up till now in the search of 1,500? There is no justice in this, no justification. Now, I will come to the potential after the operation. What is Israel trying to achieve from this operation? Let us say that they will be able to enter to Gaza and eliminate Hamas completely. Let us say that they will be able to do this. Then what? The options that are possible is that first, Israel will continue to run and manage the Gaza Strip. And Israel says, I don't want to continue managing the Gaza Strip. I don't want to reoccupy. I want to do this operation and exit. Because managing Gaza will cost the Israeli treasury 30 billion shekels a year. And nobody wants to pay this price. Then what will happen? Will Israel withdraw and leave a vacuum in Gaza? Israel cannot do so, because if Israel leaves a vacuum in Gaza, Hamas will rebuild itself again. Maybe not Hamas. Maybe then the Iranian Revolutionary Guards will be on the borders of Otef Gaza if they leave a vacuum there. So they cannot withdraw. They cannot leave a vacuum. Okay. One of the scenarios is to invite the Arab countries to come and manage Gaza. No Arab countries want to come and manage Gaza. The Arab countries will maximum contribute in the financially in the reconstruction of Gaza. You will not find any Arab countries that will send soldiers to Gaza to maintain the situation there. And there will be no Palestinian that will accept to come on top of an Israeli tank to rule Gaza. Nobody, there is no Palestinian that will accept to take the keys from Gaza, from Israel. So what will be the solution? What will be the end results? That's why the Americans keep telling the Israelis, what will be your math is after the war? Nobody is giving an answer, because nobody is thinking about an answer now.
Mhm.
Everybody is driven by the sense of revenge, by the sense of regaining the pride of the Israeli military. The generals in Israel are thinking in a very confused way. Of course, they can show a lot of power, a lot of destruction power in Gaza, but they cannot offer a political solution. They cannot even offer a security solution from the operation. Who said that only Gaza is capable to do the 7th of October massacre? Can you imagine what could happen in the West Bank? What is separating Beit El from Ramallah or Psagot from Al-Bira? A fence of 1.5 meters. Technically, another 7th of October can be done daily in the West Bank if things deteriorate. We have only, guys, we have only one option. It's political. If we want to save ourselves, all of us, Israelis and Palestinians, we need to resolve to a diplomatic solution now. The Palestinians need to have the right to self-determination. There should be a Palestinian state.
Mhm.
There is no other way to solve this conflict. We
Thank you,
keep
Samir.
risking and gambling the life of innocent Palestinians and Israelis each time we delay this option.
Thank you so much, Samir. Salman, I want to bring that question to you as well, how you see the end game here, both with regard to Gaza and potential negotiations in the future, because right now, it just seems from my perspective that going immediately to negotiations over a two-state solution just isn't going to be realistic on neither side. So how do you see things playing out? And what do you think are the scenarios for Gaza afterward, based on your conversations with diplomats in the region, in Europe? What would you say are the top 3 scenarios?
Thanks, Ben. I spent the whole weekend talking to people in diplomatic circles, as well as on the ground in the UN, about Gaza and looking ahead. There's a lot of sort of commentary now which is developing ideas for the day after and how Gaza could be governed. But I think a lot of that depends on how quickly this conflict ends. Already 3 weeks into this, and even less than that in terms of direct Israeli military operations, Gaza has come close to collapse. The UN came out with it publicly, and I think that's real. It's not scaremongering. We are looking at a total collapse of the administrative, the economic, and the law and order situation. It begs the question, who will actually be able to run it in this time, whilst Hamas, of course, continues to engage in its war on Israel. And that, I think, the deeper the hole we dig, the more difficult it is for us to be able to get out of it. I agree with Samir. I don't see any Arab state or coalition of Arab states which are going to act as effectively as trustees of Gaza in the future. It will be to support financial reconstruction, development, all of that. But here, us, the Europeans, who put in money, billions of euros over the years, only to see most of it smashed up. So it's the answer and the scenarios really depend on how quickly this conflict can be brought to an end, and we can find an alternative to try and achieve Israel's aims vis-a-vis Hamas, and the Palestinian aims of hope towards self-determination and realizing their rights with Israelis. Now, as you just said, Ben, that still seems quite far away. But here's my worry. We don't have time. You know, I was in Lebanon working for the UN envoy, as you said in the introduction, during the 2006 conflict. In those 34 days, the situation could have got totally out of hand. I remember very clearly in the first few days, it could have spun into the kind of conflict, all-out conflict that we're seeing today, this time between Hezbollah and Israel. It didn't, because the international community, whether Lebanese agree with it or not, did act to restrain the Israeli government at that time, especially when they saw that Israel was not making real headway on the ground. We saw that in the UN reports we were getting from the ground every day. The Israeli army didn't move very far inside. And so they started an effort internationally to try and create a tapering down of the escalation, and which then led to de-escalation. Effectively, by day 24, 25, the conflict was coming to an end, even though there was very heavy bombing all the way till the end. Now, what objectives were achieved? Well, Hezbollah is stronger than ever today. So I would agree with those who say that we do need to find a pathway to a serious political process. From where I'm sitting, that requires a period of transition. That's going to be a very long period of transition for many people psychologically. But in that period of transition, we need an evolution of leaderships on both sides, Israelis and Palestinian, that are willing to come to the table and to talk. In addition, we need an international mechanism that will, through thick and thin, support those Israelis and Palestinians who want to come to a political understandings. The quartet, which I was part of all those years ago, is defunct. We need to find a new international mechanism. There are ideas out there. I'd be happy to elaborate those. The final thing I'll say, and maybe you want to ask me that, the Gulf. The Gulf players are the new variable in all of this. And let me tell you and your audience, every single one of the GCC actors wants a peace agreement and normalization with Israel under the right conditions. We saw that with how close perhaps we were getting with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But what's also clear now, if it wasn't understood before, is that the road does run through Palestine. So we have a new Middle East which is growing on the edges of the Middle East in the Gulf. Those people want to connect, they want to get ahead, they want to develop technology, and they want to connect with a more stable region, including Israel in that respect. But that will not happen until we are on the pathway towards political agreements between Israelis and Palestinians. And I would lament that. But it's that essence of time. If we run out of time, we're going to go the other way. We in effect will have three active fronts intensifying. We already have the epicenter in Gaza, but people mentioned the West Bank. This is deeply, deeply worrying for Palestinians, but I would say for Israelis. And I think it will also have a greater and greater impact in terms of Jordan. And then there is the wider front around Israel's borders. And if this is only the first phase, I hate to think what that looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Salman. I want to direct one of the questions from our audience to you and also get Ksenia's take on it, which is the subject of hostages. You obviously
And
spent
if
a
you
lot
can
of time-
just allow me to
Please, yeah, go ahead.
very briefly in 2 sentences to comment, because I think that this is important to also to, listen to what Israelis who are seeking peace and who do envisage their future in the system that has 2 states that want to compromise. So many of those who were slaughtered on the Saturday, the communities in the southern Israel, all of the kibbutzim there, actually they comprise the highest percent in Israel of left-wing parties voters. It's Meretz, it's Labor, and in some cases it's also one of the Arab parties. So these are exactly the people who not only that they said empty words about wanting to live in 2-state solution, but didn't do anything for it. They acted politically. They were the ones also to develop personal ties with Palestinians. Many of the people there, they were activists in B'Tselem, civil society organizations that support connections with Palestinians and so on. I think it's important to understand to what degree right now the community of specifically those Israelis, and they are already a minority, who do believe in 2-state solution, is wounded and terrified. And I can tell you that I am talking to these people, to some of them, people whom I know, and I can tell you, Samer and also Salman, that they did not give up of the dream. They did not give up on the principle, despite the horror. But I can also tell you that none of them envisages life in the place where they lived until 7th of October, with Hamas still in power in Gaza Strip. So I don't know if there is diplomatic solution to all of this. I genuinely hope that there is. But I can tell you for sure that even the most, people who drove Palestinian patients from Gaza to hospitals, they volunteered in this. 3 volunteers, that came from this community were killed. One of them is kidnapped right now in Gaza, Vivian Silver. So I can tell you that, again, for all of them, there is absolutely, this is crystal clear for everybody that they will not be able, not only them, it's also Sderot, it's Ashkelon, it's all of the cities, more to the center, and also in the north and in other places that know that while you have the regime, the murderous regime, that is, yes, brutalizing the Palestinians as well, they are the first victims of the Hamas, even before the Israelis. If this will stay there, life will never, be able to go back to these destroyed places. So here, this is the Israeli perspective from the peace camp, so again, we don't know how this can be solved. If somebody knows, how to promote it without basically chasing the Hamas terrorists out of the holes where they are today, I think this person will deserve a Nobel Prize for peace like nobody else, to save human lives and to hope to save the perspective for the future for our peoples and for the whole region. Ben.
Thank you so much, Ksenia. I want to ask specifically about the hostages because we've been getting conflicting reports about potential partial release. There's been a lot of talk about Hamas' offer of all for all. Literally, they will release all the hostages in return for Israel releasing all Palestinian prisoners. And it seemed like even Netanyahu didn't immediately shoot that down. So I want to understand from you what you're hearing. What do you think are the potential scenarios for the hostages? And then I also want to bring back in Salman because of his connections in Qatar and to talk about the Qatari role. But Ksenia, what are you hearing the latest on the hostages?
Very briefly, not much. And what we hear, it's what we do hear, I mean, not, except for the information that was publicized and so on, it's not very comforting because unfortunately, you have more and more voices in Israel. And some people said it from the very beginning. This should be crystal clear that an option for a deal that all for all, this is a reasonable price to pay for the people who were not defended and protected by their state, okay? But at the same time, we also understand, and this is from Qataris, this is coming from Qataris, that there is no deal on the table right now, that there is no such deal. And, there was a time that I have my sources as a journalist in Hamas in Gaza. I don't have the sources anymore, but I do know people journalists who still have connections despite the blackout of communications. Hamas people did have communication during this weekend. And from there, it sounds like they want to just drag this communication about the hostages, not to close the deal as soon as possible, just the opposite, to drag it for unlimited time. And what it means that for a time being, they exist there. Israel tries to fight against the Hamas also in Gaza. The hostages are where they are. Their families are in anguish, and there is no solution. Okay, so then I'm telling you, after speaking to a few Israeli generals, not all of them from center left, some of them actually on the right, and some of them would not still say it, in the public, but they do share this thought of, this is not such high of a price to save, the people who were kidnapped, but there is no serious intention, and perhaps Salman has more data and information than I do.
Yeah, Salman, what are you hearing? Speak about the hostages, and then more generally, if you could speak about Qatar's role, because a lot of people might not understand why Hamas has a political office in Doha to begin with. There's been reports that they might re-examine their relations with Hamas after the war. So if you could speak first about the hostages and then about the Qatari relationships with Hamas.
I'm sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm not going to say too much about the hostages other than what Kesnia has just said. I think it's difficult to speculate. There are these different scenarios. There have been some offers focusing particularly on children, but it's very murky and it's very difficult. What I do know, the guy who's working on this, he's the State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Mohammed Al-Khulaifi. He's now become quite experienced at this. He was the one who, for example, helped negotiate the release of American hostages from Iran recently. I also know that this is one of the top priorities for the Qataris, and yet there's a fair amount of frustration at this stage. But I'm not going to, if you don't mind, go any further, also because I'm not 100% sure, and it would be irresponsible of me to speculate beyond that. With regards to, but let me just say on the hostages, I mean, this must be done. You cannot have women, children, and civilians being held in this way. It cannot be seen even as a bargaining tool, though there should be due process, and those prisoners in Israeli prisons, a lot of them children as well, many of whom have been taken even in the last 3 weeks from the West Bank, need to be looked at. But when it comes to those hostages in Gaza, there is absolutely no justification for women and children and civilians being there. With regards to Qatar, well, look, Qatar made a determination as it rose as a regional power in the late 80s, early 90s onwards, under its previous leadership of the Emir Hamid bin Khalifa, that they would, amongst other things, try to be an actor that speaks to everybody. That perhaps came unstuck when they were seen to be supporting one particular side when it came to the Arab revolutions, which started in 2010. But I think Qatar is back to trying to play that kind of mediation role. It believes in it. That is why over a long period of time, it has cultivated relationships with non-governmental organizations, some would say terrorist organizations under certain countries, like the Taliban, like Hamas. I myself have met some of the Hamas leadership in previous years in Doha. And certainly, if you talk to the United States, if you talk to other Western actors, I see that the British Foreign Secretary is headed there again, proving to be a useful channel and a useful actor that can get things done. That is balanced with also giving a voice to what is perceived as the Arab street in Al Jazeera. Now, many who could be listening here may object to some of the coverage of Al Jazeera, particularly Arabic, but it is seen as an outlet to give media coverage which is not covered elsewhere, certainly in the Western media. Qatar will continue to play this role. Of course, let's not forget that it also houses the biggest forward military United States base in the Middle East, in Qatar as well. It is also now considered to be a favored nation non-NATO ally by the United States, and certainly diplomatic relations have gone from strength to strength, not just with the United States, but with other Western powers as well. I notice, by the way, on hostages that the Qatari ambassador in Washington recently met with a family or with some people whose family are being held hostage. I think it would be good that Qatari officials continue to meet with the families themselves and engage with them and listen to what are absolutely heartbreaking situations.
Thank you so much, Salman, and I want to thank all of our panelists today.
Ben, if you could just excuse me for a second, but we just
please.
received news that during ground operation yesterday, an Israeli soldier was released, and she's free, she's well, and she has already met her family. That just happened now.
Thank you for adding that. And I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank all of you for joining us. These are very difficult times, and I think it's very important that we have still common spaces where Jews and Arabs can get together, and certainly common information spaces. So we at Ropes, we will continue to provide webinar coverage. We encourage you to subscribe to our podcast. We're going to be having a lot of great episodes dealing with the war, and we will continue to be fighting for a post-conflict region because we don't see any way else to get beyond this endless cycle of conflict every few years. So we thank you for being with us, and we're in just a moment going to put up a list of charities that are helping civilians on both sides of this conflict, and we encourage you, if you want to help ameliorate the situation, to consider supporting one or more of those. Again, thank you for being with us, and shalom, salam, and I hope you all are well. Thank you.